here. So hi everyone, welcome to our what is this May SIP call meeting. Nice to see you all. Today it's a small group, but sometimes small is better, especially when we talk about implementation and projects for sure, also for discussion. So what I thought we could do a small round of introduction. We don't have much time, so you never know the connections that this group can bring. And then I had the point kind of to get your feedback and brainstorm around something I'm working on lately. So if you are okay, just do a small introduction on what you're doing, where you work, what's your connections to strategy implementation, and so we know a bit about each other, and then we dive into the content of the day. Nicodem, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi guys. It's good to be here. So, my name is Nicodem Latoja. I am Associate Director of the Computerized Systems Quality. This is pharmaceutical industry, pharma biotech industry. This is more related to computerized systems validation. And if you not know much about computerized systems validation and pharmaceutical industry, this is not only quality, but also vendor management, quality assurance, and processes and projects. So this is not much related to strategy per se yet. But this is something I wanted to pursue in the future. The funny story is that some time ago, this was actually 2 years ago, I simply decided to read more books because the number of books I was reading was not something I was particularly proud of. And I started with the business-oriented books, and this is why I started reading about the business in general, strategy, negotiations, and this is why I got this hook for strategy implementation as well. So this is something I am trying to move towards in the future, having in mind my background and my experience.
Nice. So it's really personal interest. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll go around the circle here. Chris.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Well, some of you know me.
You know you.
So my background is varied, but I've been working on project management, consulting, PMO implementation, strategy, execution, and balanced scorecard for the last 20 or 30 years. So we started introducing the idea of a strategy execution office with integrated PMO, PPM, strategy, administration, if you like, for execution process back in 2005 or something like that. So that's really where our focus, and still working very much on that with clients, and also building in the idea of importance of integrated governance as a means of helping to get strategy implementation along.
Thank you, Chris. So you're an expert in the field. Yeah, you've been there. Robert, please.
Yes, okay. So yeah, I've been working, I guess, the last 3 decades or so, mainly in different management roles and operations in the IT industry for international companies. And I think my tweak was, my last role was at Citrix as a go-to-market strategy director. And I think my tweak is, again, I'm self-employed since a year now, and I have a very big passion for managing strategic initiatives, because that's what I did for most of my life in sales organizations for the tech industry. And the interesting thing is that obviously sales organizations, they are not native in project management or anything like this. So I've been following you, Antonio, for a while now, on kind of your articles and your books, and obviously I put my own thoughts together, and I think the important thing and what drives me a little bit currently in my new journey is how can you help those organizations like in sales, in marketing, that typically have absolutely no expertise in how to manage projects and strategic initiatives, and maybe sometimes even have a bias against the disciplined approaches and working. How can you help them actually kind of become better at, kind of turning their strategy into something that can be executed successfully? So I think that's what's driving me currently in my new self-employed business journey. And I'm just actually kind of completed taking the course on the strategy implementation professional, because I want to round up my own personal experience from, kind of the last 2 decades of work, making sure that I have the latest and greatest on scientific evidence, etc., around how you manage and implement strategy and what the best practices are. So this is how I came to it. I'm just actually, I will do my exam next week, so I'm looking forward to that.
Wow.
Again, yeah, be happy to part of this team.
Thank you. Nice to have you, Robert. Thank you. And Christian.
Hi, so my name is Christian. I'm based in Barcelona, although I come from the US. I grew up in LA and then moved to New York, which is where my coaching and consulting work began about 14, 15 years ago now. And I started in the world of education and parenting, believe it or not. And ever since I moved to Barcelona, my work has evolved so that today I'm working. I do strategic performance consulting, which is really looking at the holistic organization. And our goal is to transform potential into high performance. So we focus a lot on the high performance organization, evidently teams, but it's really the area where we like to work. The intersection is between leadership development, it's performance measurement, and strategy execution. We find that when these 3 things converge, there's a lot of power there. There's obviously more that leads to creating a high performance organization, but we find a lot of elements and keys in this nexus to be important. I've been working with strategy for a while, working with people for a while. We're actually certified in a methodology called PUMP. Do you know them, Antonio?
No,
Do you know Stacy
no.
Barr?
Yeah.
Stacy knows you and
Yeah.
of your work, and she also knows Robin. And in fact, I'm sorry, Chris?
I know her as well.
Stacy Barr, yeah. And in fact, it's through Stacy that I learned about your institute, because she mentioned you in a post or something. And so we find this to be a place where we like to play, you might say. It's in execution. I love executing things, not people, just strategies. But also working in leadership, working with leaders to really ensure that the right leadership is in place. So it touches upon some of the elements that that the SIR addresses. And that's kind of what we like to play. That's where our strengths lie, and that's where this comes into play. And to second Robert, I've never taken my test, and my time is about to expire.
Oh.
I'm not telling my business partner that, who happens to be my wife.
Okay. Well.
But yeah, but I'll be doing it. I'll be doing it soon as well. So yeah.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
They always do.
She will. I know. She will.
Okay, nice. Very diverse group, but all with similar kind of passion and interest. So that's nice. So I wanted to bring, we have the standard slides here, so let me just bring them. There's a small update on our site. I think the main The main changes or update is on the sidewalk, the one that you see here on the right bottom. It's almost ready, the second version. We've included new articles and upgrade and on diversity, on sustainability, on AI, so that you'll get a copy when it's available for free. You'll get the electronic version as members. So I think we've also refreshed some of the content on the course. So yeah, there's some minors. We wanted to do something a bit more exclusive for the community, like bringing guest speakers, but we still struggle to find the right format to doing that. So I like these smaller groups because we can discuss more and go deeper into some challenge that you face or best practice, and everybody will benefit. So something around those lines. But the main one is that, and there's a group of people from this institute, from us, working on non-for-profit. That is taking a bit more time, but they're working and developing some guidance on how to implement strategy on non-for-profits and public sector, which is very interesting. And the point of the discussion I wanted to have is about something, it's maybe a bit selfish, but it's something that you already mentioned, is I started to work on a new book for HBR, and the focus is on how can organizations become more project-driven, meaning they prioritize implementation, and they just build more competencies around implementation, projects, project management, and so I'm looking for organizations that are going through this or have gone through this, especially from the point of view of a CEO. The person who drives this change usually is the top of the company. I'm not looking for feedback from project managers or strategy people, really the top of the organizations, how they manage. So what I did is I developed a structure for this, where what is a project-driven organization. So there is organizational aspects. You see the orange, which is about the culture, the organizational structure, the governance and decision-making. Then you have more around the leadership, the executives at the top. It's about the strategy, the resources and competencies, and performance and rewards. And then I think the basic skills on implementation, I focus on project management, could be implementation strategy as well, but that's more around ways of workings and tools. And for each of them, I have some criteria. So in total, I have 22 characteristics so far, which will say, okay, this company is moving into that direction to do the operations business as usual, but that will be more and more automated and robotized and so on. So most people start working in this space. So some of the characteristics, let me just go through a few of them, because I want that we discuss this. Is this making sense? Is this something that you've seen? Is this something that, is there anything missing? So culture is culture of projects and acceptance of failure. So this is something that psychological safety. Transparency, I think people should know what are we working on, which projects are the most important. And the culture of stopping projects, I think this is something that is a hard one, because nobody stops projects easily or cancels them. The structure is more flatter organization, so it's really removing hierarchies, at least for the execution of projects and strategies. The senior executive active sponsor, meaning they spend 2 or 3 days per week in project activities, not just occasionally, but they are heavily involved. This is something that is very important, removing that hierarchical structure to allow people to float in the company. Say, we have a big project here, let's bring a fully dedicated team, not part-time resources, but let's say we move them and we place them there, right? So why not? The best companies, they would do that. Okay, hierarchy operations is fine, but we want the best people. So this is staffing projects fully dedicated. Decision-making, it's empowering the team to take decisions. lack of bureaucracy and escalations and just fast decision, and minimizing committees, simplify governance. So that's more on the organizational aspects. Executive leaders, really a long-term focus, not the short-term quarterly review, but long-term. Amazon is always saying we don't look at our results today, we're focusing on the future, focusing operations versus transformation. So today you need to choose between something at business as usual or operations, and transformation is always operations is primary. That would mean no, let's focus on the project first. Extreme prioritization. So it's really knowing what are the top 3 initiatives and not having hundreds. Resources is the whole organization needs to have follow SIP training or some around project management. Interesting, one of my clients, a big luxury company, I gave them a training for 60 people. They were core focus on projects. After 2 weeks, they said, listen, can you train 5,000 people? Because we realize that so many people are working in projects, and that's where we're moving. The shift of resources, collaboration spaces. I think one of the more critical aspects that I always say is you see when a change happens, when the performance and reward changes. And many companies say we have change, but the performance and reward is always based on the business as usual, the results, the current KPIs. So have you seen any changes to project-related resource, team-based rewards? And the last piece is more ways of working. We're going into hybrid methods with the SIP, the SEER, the hybrid benefits. I think we need to focus much more on benefits, people, projects. So this is a bit like when I had to brainstorm, what does it mean to be a project-driven organization? Not everything has to be covered, but most of it will show these companies moving into that space. Haier, I don't know if you know, this South Korean company has really focused on shifting their ways of working into this type of approach, for example. So I wanted to just open up here for discussion and say, does this make sense? Would you change anything that you don't see there? Have you seen any CEOs driving this type of change succeeding or even failing? So I just wanted to take the opportunity to, because I think this influence strategy implementation massively, and it's really not addressing just one of the pieces. We build methodology or we train some people. It's the whole thing that you need to work on to really transform the business into business focus on transformation. So I'll stop talking there. I was going to do breakout rooms, but I don't think there's point to having breakout rooms. Otherwise, we're just one in each breakout room. So I propose to just go through the table and understand, just listen from your own perspective. Let me start now differently. I'll start with you, Robert.
Yeah.
Is something that resonates, that you've seen, that you've heard, that you've read?
Yeah.
That you...
No, it does resonate. I mean, from the things you showed, I think it makes good sense. I mean, the things that always triggers me, because when you say, have I seen this? And, you know, I have to explain, I spent basically all of my time in enterprises that are not very large enterprises, so not the Ciscos and Amazons of these worlds, but typically companies that are international, but you know, below 10,000 employees, typically in that range.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think what I sometimes think is, are these, when CEOs decide to take that strategic move to say to become more project driven or to become a more agile organization, you know, often obviously this is triggered by their collaboration with, you know, kind of some of the big consulting firms, you know, kind of who can drive this agenda in very large enterprises. I think my question is, when you talk about being project driven, is there segmentation where it's like, okay, this typically happens in very large enterprises where there's the bandwidth, the critical mass, kind of to drive, kind of strategic changes from that magnitude. And on the other hand, maybe is project driven also prevalent, mainly in maybe digital native companies, kind of very new companies who obviously have a completely different style of collaboration and how they work and do things, which might be smaller, but obviously who are born with that notion of, okay, everything we do is, kind of is agile, kind of is driven through projects, etc. So that what triggered me is there segmentation of companies and industries who are more prone to be project driven and others who struggle and who have maybe some internal, because they maybe not have the critical mass. Smaller enterprises are often driven very much, I think, because they don't have that specific resources, who think mainly about kind of strategy implementation. It's in those companies, a lot of that is done by the people who are mainly focused on running the business and kind of the operational stuff. So they don't typically have that luxury of kind of people who kind of have time to focus on that. So I think that's what driving me. And that's why I have not seen it, because again, the people and the leaders I know typically are in that context of kind of mid-sized firms, if you like. And my experience is that they find it hard to set time and resources aside to make these moves, rather than being driven by what competitive pressures are and things like that. My experience, but again, it's just my impression.
Thank you, Robert. And we'll come back to some of these points. I think they're good. I think one point clear is we're moving. We're not really focusing on project-driven organizations like consulting companies or engineering that they do projects as core business. We're talking at the companies that have to do both the running of an organization while they have to transform and become more agile. So, but the middle size is a great point. Let me go now to Christian. What do you think? We high performing companies, so
yeah. So I bid to second some of the things that Robert has said. I have found in my experience that organizations do not think about projects. They just think about work. We're doing work, and they're working. And they think very specifically about projects when it's something that is labeled a project or it's been designated to be a project. They just don't think that way. And I've worked in both as an employee, but also in consulting, different size companies. And it's a little bit, I think, of what Robert was saying in terms of the nature of the industry that may have something to do with it, which is a bit what you were saying, Antonio. If it's an architectural firm or someone who, works with projects. But I don't think many people have that mentality or that approach to work itself. So I think the conversation needs to change around that, because I agree with you. Everything is a project. And I agree with many of the things that you put on that list. One thing that I would add, if I may, to the list when it comes to culture, I would say not so much only just a growth mindset, but a learning culture.
I like
it's a culture that leans strongly on learning, because that's the way that then you can shut down a project much easier. What do we learn from this, from the fact that the project didn't deliver? And so it makes it easier to make those kind of decisions. If we're a learning culture, we've spent this much money, this much time, that much energy, we need to shut it down. What do we learn from it? And so I think it's easier for an organization to make that kind of decision. I think the other thing which is key, and it's part of what my experience tells me, is when people are very good at performance measurement. And I would invite you to check out the PUMP methodology, Antonio. It aligns really beautifully with a lot of what you had on that list, because it promotes many of the things that you had on the list of 22 criteria, 23 criteria. it's really putting in place the right kind of KPIs. You know, a lot of the work that we do around that is we have to educate people what we mean by performance measurements and KPIs. People think it's a number, you know, and it's a thing to do. It's the methodology really awakens someone to have a different understanding. And a lot of what's built in there is to begin to look at KPIs in a more strategic way that begins to develop someone's mindset around the idea of projects. Do you know what I'm saying? It kind of feeds into that. I think it promotes that kind of thinking, not just something that I have to do, a target I have to meet, but rather they can see themselves as part of the larger organization whose attempt is to execute on this project, or is attempting to execute on this strategy, or whatever the case might be. So I might lean more heavily in that direction.
Very interesting.
Mhm.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
Sure.
Chris, what you've seen there in the Middle East, is this something you see often, or?
I see a couple agreeing with what others have said, but I think there's two things that are quite important. So one is purpose, right, which I know is one of your favorite things, Antonio.
Yeah.
But I think we need to change these organizations, and you're saying project focused, and that really means change focus. And I think this is about, in today's world, strategically, we have to have the capabilities to change rapidly and effectively, right? And that means two things. First, we need those kind of skills, but secondly, we need to be thinking that way, not about how do I preserve this process or business as usual, or this silo, and just about efficiency, but instead about how do we maintain purpose across everybody, so we have a common intent, common purpose, and secondly, how do we make sure that we've got the capabilities to run projects successfully? And that means not just run them, but to select them, you know, and to kick them off, and then to make sure that we actually realize the value from that, and we keep that going. So it's about how do we change people and get them focusing on resilience and change as their core reason for being, if you like, and making sure they have that common purpose. And some of that, as we say, on performance and rewards. Currently, we see a lot of people talk about KPIs, and they're looking at business outcomes, and they're being rewarded if they do that. And yes, in the strategy, we've got objectives, and we can allocate the objective to senior leader or whoever, and they've got a KPI target, and they're going to get some bonus if they achieve that. But they're really still looking at the business outcome. They're not actually looking at the change part of it enough very often, and there's no reward and no penalty if they don't sponsor that change properly the way they should do.
Yeah.
So I agree that we need to change the rewards to be focusing on the right kind of behaviors, the right capabilities around making things happen and being resilient and looking at change, not so much at these static outcomes from the business, if you like. So refocusing from business as usual to business in the new environment, the latest environment, right? And how do I deal, and how do I do sense making, and how do I deal with things coming up? And if my strategic initiatives are not working, what is there that drives me to get them working again? So I need some sort of performance and purpose working together that make me focus on making these changes happen. And going back to what Robert was saying, I used to work for Computer Associates back some time ago in sales, and yes, there was no strategy beyond next quarter's bonus and share price, right? Anything else was not something that I would even listen to for 5 seconds remotely. Well, not me, it's probably why I didn't last long there as a salesman. But CEO and the COO, yes, they're only focused on share price.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a cat invasion here. You can open the door. So
Nice.
so that purpose, and I think those shifting that focus onto capabilities for running change, which is project capabilities, but also those selection, purpose prioritization type things.
Mm-hmm. Anyone wants to comment on each other?
Yeah, just one thought, basically on what Chris said as well, the ability of running change. And again, if you think about large organizations, I think one of my observations is obviously strategy, change management is often thought of from the corporate head structure.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I mean, I've been spending most of my roles in like EMEA roles, so kind of not at the corporate level, but in a larger geography. And what you have is, you get these strategic imperatives and the priorities, and obviously then at the edge, kind of in the countries and the geos, you need to think through, and you need equally the same project management capabilities, and from a leadership perspective, from a local leadership perspective, from a middle management perspective. And I think the buck most often stops at the corporate level. Kind of they have their PMO offices and they have certified project managers, etc. But they lack the knowledge of the divisions, the geography, etc. But the work has to be actively performed there. But those are typically kind of sub-organizations and subdivisions. They're typically deprived of all the resources and the expertise and the capability to do the execution. I mean, to give you an example, if you look at go-to-market strategy, typically in Europe, you always have a bit of a different tweak on go-to-market strategy versus the Americas or the US, because, again, typically in EMEA, you drive more through the channel, kind of you have different aspects. Sometimes you even need to think about having different compensation models for that. So that means that the edge and the local leadership have to reinterpret and, kind of those strategic imperatives and have maybe their own scorecard or kind of balanced scorecard approach on what the key objectives are and what the initiatives are that they drive it. But again, in general, my observation is they lack and they are deprived of the resources that have the capabilities to do that. And in my experience, that is a big issue, because everybody would nod to, kind of everything about becoming more project focused, more agile. Everybody wants to do that. But I think in large organizations, if you look more at the edges, they lack, kind of they struggle just with the capabilities and expertise to really execute properly.
I like that. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah.
What Robert just said. I'm sorry, Chris.
Yeah, sorry. And I think very much it's also about the fact that, and my experience is that at those further edges, they also lack the purpose. They don't understand and they don't buy in to why they are doing this and why it's important to keep this change going, as opposed to just get on with fighting day-to-day fires. And that I see as a key challenge is getting that purpose and that energy around. And of course, along with that has to go the skills, but they'll get those skills if they get out there and try, right? So they will learn. Perhaps it's not the best way, but it might well be the most effective way in the long run. But first they need to have the attitude and the understanding of what it is. What is this purpose? I think that's a lot of what we're seeing. Where organizations are successful, they have managed to imbue their staff all the way down with a common sense of purpose and an eagerness to go and make changes and make sure those changes are working. And why? Why are we making sure this change works? And a lot of the time I find, yes, they might have a nice balanced scorecard chart on the wall, but it actually really means nothing to them emotionally.
Yeah, of course. Christian, you were going to say.
Yeah, so following up what Robert said made me think about another thing in terms of the list of the criteria. I think the org design plays a big role in this as well, because of the tendency to fall into silos immediately with the sales department, with the marketing department. Immediately that begins to happen. And so depending on how teams are created to come together to work on projects, it also begins to change the mindset. So it's transversal teams, that's what's required to execute a project. It's no longer, it's their thing. It's actually, it's the organization. So there's greater buy-in. And I second, exactly what Chris said, the idea of purpose. I see that more and more and more becoming more important. We saw that as a result of the post-pandemic world.
Yeah.
People feeling belonging and significance in the workplace and knowing that they are contributing to something that is meaningful, that has a purpose. So I think that also plays a role because it's easier for people to see the connection between where they're at, what they're doing, and what it is that the organization wants to accomplish long term. I think org design would need to be looked at. Definitely. It would also be one of those things. You kind of mentioned it where you said a flatter organization or something like that, which doesn't work in my experience, doesn't work in every situation. In certain situations, if it's not executed properly, it's chaotic. At the end of the day, I think many of us like to have a leader. I don't care if there's two people above me. I just want someone to tell me what to do. And that's just how we're structured psychologically. I may have a hard time making decisions, or I think it's also a reflection of the culture itself. But I would put an emphasis also on org design. Being able to foster a project-driven organization. How are you structured as an organization that would foster or hinder the ability to do that?
Have you seen any cases where the organizational structure has changed?
Yeah.
Yeah? In which way? Or
I've done some of that work. I know people who have also done, some of that work. It has changed. Funnily enough, it's the reason why I like the SIR, because it touches upon things that I've worked on or that I'm familiar with, and now it's all in one. It's all in one circle. They've realized that in order to execute on that strategy or put in place that initiative, that the business model needs to change, which leads to having the conversation on how will we organize as an entity. Not always easy. Obviously, there needs to be a lot of buy-in. But when you begin early on getting that buy-in from teams and stakeholders, it happens and it's doable. It takes time to get it done. And that's why when I worked on things that require that, I've always say, let's experiment. Launch one project, and create transversal teams and see what that might look like and who may be needed. And over time, it changes. The organization actually changes.
okay, that's good.
I've seen that done well in smaller organizations because there's trust among the people. It's probably harder, a little bit what Robert was saying, people on the fringes, the expertise, the vision, the connection to the organization's purpose and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would need to change. I couldn't imagine it being done otherwise. So yeah.
Thank you.
Chris. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was just in what we were talking about there, Chris, when you mentioned change management, that just brought another thing to mind, because I think, we see so often, and this has been a strange aberration in the project management world, that people have tried to say, well, I'm a project manager, I manage my project, I don't do change, right? So I'll create this product, but I don't care whether it ever gets to delivering the value or not, which to me, my mind has always been nonsense, because projects are opportunities, and unless we realize the opportunity, the project doesn't ever work. So change management, I think, can't be treated as something that's something outside. Someone's going to come and do change management and make sure people change. To me, that's nonsense. What we need to have is everybody in the organization is responsible for change management, right? They need to be working with purpose and with understanding and with available resource to make things happen. And they need to understand that. And if they're not doing that, it doesn't really matter whether we have a change manager or a change management department or a center of excellence or something. You know, they're going to be swimming against the tide forever. So that just brought that to my mind.
And just one comment on the organizational aspect that Christian, you mentioned. I think it's important, but again, in my experience, it also depends on what companies do from a culture perspective to promote collaboration across organizational structures. Give you one example. So in the tech industry, I think at least what I've seen in, maybe not the very large organizations, but, if you again look mid-sized, smaller enterprises, etc., over the last 2 decades, I mean, I've seen that generally nearly all companies went to becoming very centralized from a corporate perspective functionally. So sales, marketing, customer success, product, etc. So and then kind of those had the direct reporting into kind of the divisions, into the GUs, etc. So everything was ending up in the corporate structure, which obviously made it much easier to drive execution efficiencies, productivity, etc. But it stalls at the same time that you become creative, because obviously at the edges and kind of in the divisions you are more restricted, because you have to work all the way up and then reconnect, etc. When it comes to projects and project execution, then the point is, again, if it has to be executed, kind of in the divisions, etc., effectively, then you have the silo structures there. And if the culture is not one of collaboration, where you have maybe local leaders who have the authority to make sure that the different functions, kind of work and collaborate together, then there's a high risk of failure. So I think it's whatever the organization is, I think that's what I'm trying to say, and however it is structured, unless you can instill that culture of collaboration across different organizational and functions, you always will fail, whatever your organizational line setup is.
Yeah, and it's that culture also of trial and error, which I think is critical.
Yeah.
So if we look at this discovery-driven strategy and things like that, we really want people to be able to try things out and fail and learn and then do better. And when we drive those efficiencies, we don't drive effectiveness, and change needs effectiveness, not efficiency. Right? We need scope. We need some margins to cater for the fact that we've got to do this via trial and error if we're going to do it well.
I agree.
Very, very interesting discussion. Is there anything else that we didn't touch upon? We talk about rewards, culture, structure.
I think a key thing here is data.
Data.
So information perhaps, but it's to make sure that if you want people to work at every level of the organization, to be able to first understand the purpose and then act to fulfill the purpose, then they need to have the authority and the resources, accountability. And that generally, a lot of the time, means they need to have the right information, they need to have the right data to hand at the right time, made available or accessible for them. And I think that's something which there's a lot of recognition out in the market, you know, with AI and big data and all the stuff we've been through, you know, that we've been through in IT in these last 5 decades. And yet there is still this complete failure to recognize this garbage in, garbage out problem. And people just don't have the information they need to make the right decisions at the right level. And to be responsive at those down on the edges. They don't know what the purpose is. They don't know what all the data is. They're not sure what their criteria for the decision making should be. What's good, what's bad, where are we trying to go, right? And so they need that. They need that, and they need to be given authority and accountability, and that's part of that governance thing that I'm working on. Is it how do we make sure that we have that governance, i.e., accountability and purpose? So I like the idea that one of the 3 key parts of governance is purpose. So why are we doing this thing? What are we doing? And if you don't have that, then you don't really have governance either. So I think these things just come together, but it means we do have to give people the data they need at the right time.
It's a good point, the data piece. Yes, I like that. And then the last point we want to finish, but for me is, how do you engage senior leaders? How do you change the mind of senior leaders when they're so focused on the short term, on day to day? How do you say this is important? You need to follow a training or any
Change the rewards.
rewards, yeah.
That's the $1 million question, Antonio.
Exactly.
That's the big one.
Yeah, I mean, just today I had a meeting with a client. They are they happen to be a not-for-profit, smaller organization, and everything that the president, CEO was saying, it's exactly what you're saying. You know, I was trying to get him to see the bigger picture, the long term. He kept focusing on the short term, revenue coming in and short term. So I said to him, well, you're in good company. I think 90% of CEOs find themselves in that position where it's like, next quarter, what are we doing number wise? And there's one thing that I oftentimes talk to leaders about. It's about legacy.
Yeah.
Which is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? And so suddenly they see the time scale like expanding. It's really expanding. What is it that they really want to be remembered for? What kind of impact is it that they're aiming for? And so it's easier to then begin to have that larger conversation. They also need data that what's being proposed will allow them to reach that which they're hoping to accomplish, because it's basically a new way of doing stuff. I always say you need to. It's a more evidence-based approach that I take with them. You need to take in your experience, your gut, but you gotta look at the data, and you gotta look at what's happening in the external world. So when I broaden the conversation, I understand, first of all, I validate the dilemma they may be in. But when I expand the conversation and I touch upon those areas, I think they're more open to seeing it. At the end of the day, they do need to see data that works, that will be a different way to get the result that they're aiming for. Right. That's what I would say. And the legacy conversation I like sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that that'll work for some people.
Yeah.
And others, the legacy they're interested in is the bank account.
That's a what?
Is their bank account.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah, which is why the guys I work for in CA went to jail. For trying to push their share price a bit beyond what GAAP allowed. So But I think I think a lot of that is getting people to understand that they need to work on the right things the right way, and that's what brings the money in the short term. That's how you make sure you hit those short-term targets, is you focus on doing things the right way, and treating people the right way in the longer term. That's how you guarantee that short-term income. And I think it's working on trying to get to where they appreciate that, and then can see how that works to stabilize and take some of the stress out of this quarterly focus.
I think it's you mentioned it, Chris, but I think you also mentioned it too, Antonio, in terms of Amazon. If I'm not mistaken, I read something somewhere, and I think it's them, that they don't bother with the short-term results. It's like they're always looking at long-term. Have you read that? I read that somewhere recently.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not sure I believe it with Amazon, but it could be.
Yeah. I think it was something about Jeff Bezos
I
who
remember
always
something.
focused on like the. Yeah, I read
I
something.
do
If I
remember
find it, I'll
something.
send it to you, Antonio.
Yeah, please do. Yes, yeah.
Because it was an interesting. It's like, yeah, of course, here's the successful company. And here's this man who was like, no, I never thought of like the next year. I never thought of the next quarter. I was thinking 5 years out, and which may or may not be true. Could be a combination of, but just that idea, like someone actually built and led this company really thinking of that long term, and tell me if that wasn't a success, yeah. So I hope that was helpful, Antonio.
Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah.
One thought is because again, how if it doesn't come right down from the CEO level, then then it's always difficult to implement this. But interestingly, obviously, since I've been reading a lot and with the kind of the stuff from the Strategy Implementation Institute and other documentation, what I think we know that because we deal with this pretty much every day.
Yeah.
But look outside, kind of into other people that I talk to and other managers, there's very few success stories or role models of very good CEOs who actually are doing that. And I think if there's a way to promote and bring that more to the foreground to a lot of people through, I don't know, LinkedIn and other things, so that it becomes, there's more awareness about what difference, such an approach can make. I think that would be something, storytelling, kind of things that attract and raise awareness, inspire people around that. I think it probably needs more of that to pull more people over the line to, kind of take a different approach.
And that may be because those are not the type of CEOs that are out there publicizing themselves and with their sort of more narcissistic habits. Those are the ones you actually hear about and get written about, etc., etc. And the other guys are just down there getting stuff done. They're a little bit more humble, and they recognize that the whole organization is doing it, not just them, and things like that.
Yeah.
The one thing I just thought of quickly, Antonio, I don't know if you're looking to research startups and scale-ups.
Yeah, also startups.
Yeah, because they have a different approach. There's more flexibility. It's funny because eventually startups then start becoming consolidated, and they scale up, and then they become traditional, many in the way that they work, which is kind of ironic because then, that gets us in trouble sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
But it would be an interesting group of people to speak to. I might know a couple of people you could speak to as well there.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Look for the founder or the CEO.
Exactly.
The organization and what you have.
Yeah. And also I think it will be interesting to see how they started, because they oftentimes see their startup as a project, and then how that progresses over time. And those who have been able to maintain that mindset are those who are successfully doing things that we've talked about. The purpose is clear. It's a learning learning culture and things of that nature, and they're able to sustain it And as Chris says, they're not all, all over the news, constantly being spoken about, and they're successfully executing along those lines.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me, that's a good illustration of the importance of purpose, because when you start a startup, you've got a very clear purpose, and everybody's working very closely together, and they're working together, and they're experiencing difficulties and changes all the time by definition, right? And they have a very clear purpose. And as they get bigger, they're pulling in people who now, my purpose is now to run HR. I don't know what this broader purpose is anymore, right? And my purpose is to run the IT department, and I've lost track of what the bigger purpose is. And now you've dissipated that purpose into these little efficiency buckets, and you no longer have any purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And now you need a change manager, because someone's got to get everybody focusing on the same direction and getting them to change what they're doing.
Right. Anyway, Antonio, do I have your email? I get your newsletter. Should I use the same one, or is there a different one?
It's forwarded to my Gmail. Yeah, if you have that, Christian, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I want to thank you, all of them. It's been one of the enrichest calls we had. Small group, but we could all speak and share, and I think it's been valuable. I think this is not just for this book, but in general, I think we're moving into this direction. So it's just it's the next level of strategy implementation. So thank you very much.
Sure.
I'll see you in a month. We don't have the date yet. It's going to be on the 1st or the 2nd Tuesday of June.
June.
Yeah, almost
Great.
summer.
Almost in summer. Okay.
Okay.
Good to see you all again. Have a wonderful
Okay.
afternoon.
Nice
Bye,
to
Robert.
meet you again.
Christian. Bye, Chris.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.